Judy Becker is the production designer of Ratched. I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby here with Judy. And to start off, this is a show set in the 40s, very distinct style to it. What was the initial vision that you had in mind for recreating the 40s in this more gothic kind of style?
My vision was very much influenced by my first concept meeting with Ryan Murphy, and I went into the meeting not knowing what to expect at all. All I knew was that it was a prequel to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So I was very well prepared with a lot of research on mental asylums of the time period. And I had watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest again and saw how gritty and realistic it looked. So I came in with like a lot of that research. And the first thing Ryan said was, this is going to look nothing like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I want it takes place in Northern California. He referenced Hitchcock and he wanted it to look very rich and lavish, and the hospital to look like a hotel that had been converted to a psychiatric hospital. So that was really fascinating to me because it's much more of a challenge than recreating the gritty reality of the times, to create something that is a bit Baroque, to use a word that Ryan likes, but also makes the audience believe that they're in that place, witnessing those happenings. So, so that was my first introduction to the way Ryan was thinking about the project, and he referenced some Hitchcock movies as well, most of which I knew very well, such as Vertigo and Psycho. I'm not sure he referenced Psycho, but I certainly thought of it with the driving scene, and Rebecca, and maybe North by Northwest, I'm not sure. But Vertigo was the biggest influence in terms of palette and approach, I would say.
Yeah. Well, the hospital you mentioned, it's such a showcase for your work. Very expansive,
Yeah.
definitely has that glamorous vibe. I read that the exteriors and the interiors were filmed in different locations, but
Yeah, yeah, it's a long but interesting story, I think,
okay.
how we arrived at the hospital. Ryan initially wanted something more Northern California looking, with a lot of wood and that feeling of being in the forest, and darker and gloomier and more Hitchcockian in a sense, although I don't think he used that word. And we were given permission to scout the entire state of California for this location. And my great location manager, Robert Fulks, F as in Frank, Oulkes, because he's so fantastic, looked everywhere. And we found a few, possible places. Some of them, by the time we actually got current photos, had been renovated, which is always sad for me, and I'm sure most other designers. And Ryan wasn't really into anything, and neither was I. I mean, there was nothing really great. And then finally, we got permission to scout a hotel that had been called the Arrowhead Springs Spa and Resort, I believe. And it was no longer a hotel or a spa. It was near San Bernardino, which is a couple of hours away from Los Angeles. And it had been changed owners in the last year or two. So Robert and I drove out there, and we got off the highway and up like miles and miles of mountain road with nothing around us. And I really felt like I was in the opening of The Shining. It was kind of creepy, but great. And there was no sign of anything. And then finally I saw in the distance this tiny little beautiful white hotel up on a cliff. And as we got closer and closer, it looked more and more magical. And we got there, and it was amazing. And I was like, this has got to be the place. Like, this is the place. This is the place. So I went back and pitched it to Ryan, and I showed him pictures, and he said, that's really not what I was asking for. And I said, I know it isn't what you were asking for, but it has some of those elements. It's really glamorous. It used to be a hotel by Paul Williams, a great Hollywood architect who Ryan liked a lot. And the interiors were designed by Dorothy Draper, a great Hollywood interior designer that Ryan liked a lot too. So he took a second look at all the photos, and he's like, okay, I'll go visit it. And we visited it. He loved it. I promised him we would get it, and then we didn't get it. The location just didn't want any film crews at all shooting there, like zero, like no amount of money could have convinced them. So we built it, and that had been the plan B, and ultimately a better plan because it was much more accessible being on the Fox lot than in San Bernardino. And more importantly, I think for the visual storytelling, we could modify it to suit our needs. And if you saw the location and our set, you would see we expanded it a lot and changed. Example, the huge solarium style room Hanover's office was nowhere at the real place. And I designed 3 matching kind of solarium rooms with curved wall, floor to ceiling windows. And one of them was the office, and the long hallways that Ratched walks down. We didn't have that at the location. So there were a lot of ways in which building it, well, I'd say in most ways building it was much better for production. And we really used that set. And the hospital was built on 2 stages. It filled up 1 stage. I can't remember the number of the stage. And then it half filled. There was a patient's common room and break room that was a 3 or 4 room continuous set. And that was in the other stage along with the motel interior. So it turned out pretty well. And we still had to add on to it as episodes developed and got written and new directors came on. We added and added. I think we had to decide whose changing room we were going to take away or whose gold room. So it was a very, very large build, by far the largest I've ever done, and really fun.
Yeah, I mean, I actually spoke with Sophie Okonedo the other day, and she was like, I had no idea that Dr. Hanover's office would be as big as it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of fun. But
Yeah.
Also, I have to mention the incredible mansion of Sharon Stone
Yeah.
playing this very
Yes.
wealthy heiress.
Yeah.
That seemed like its own incredible challenge, where her house is just packed with so much stuff and all the greenery outside too.
Yeah, and I can't take
What went
credit
into
for
that?
it.
Oh, okay.
That was a concept that ended up a little differently in realization. Ryan had based the character partly on Doris Duke, this famous wealthy woman who had an estate in Hawaii. And we looked at, it was Moroccan style. So we scouted for a big Moroccan style mansion with beautiful gardens. And we found a few things and nothing. They all had something great, and then they didn't have the other elements. And then Sharon herself suggested we look at Tony Duquette's house. Tony Duquette was a pretty famous Hollywood stylist and designer, and he did jewelry maker. He did a lot of things, costumes, and he had 2 houses. The first one was very large from what I hear, and he made everything himself. He would hot glue shells to the wall, and it was like maximalist decoration. And that house burnt down, and he moved literally next door to Sharon Stone, and they were friends. He passed away a few years ago, but she still knew about the house and had access to the current owners, and it was convenient for her, and everyone loved the idea. So I went and scouted it, and it's not a big house, but it has so much in it that it gives a lot of production value. And in fact, we had to remove a lot to have room for the actors and camera and not break any of the precious Tony Duquette artifacts. That the house was pretty much as he lived in it. It's kept as a sort of museum. The gardens were amazing, these terraced gardens with a koi pond at the bottom. And it was really fun to be in the gardens because there would be real branches and real plants. And then there would be branches that Tony Duquette had painted a coral color that looked like pieces of coral sticking in the ground. So I can't take credit for it. I mean, it's all Tony Duquette, and it was amazing. And Sharon, I think, loved shooting there. I was there her first day of shooting when she walked in and was so happy. And we did build her character's son's bedroom on stage. So much happens there. And it was pretty fun to build that because I was like, we can do whatever we want. Like we can mix up these wallpapers and do faux, what's that stone, malachite. There was a lot of faux malachite in Tony Duquette's house. And we can hot glue like seashells and paint them silver and gold. Like it was a fun project, kind of like a high-end trading spaces, because it probably was all going to fall apart like in a few weeks, but it looked really good at the time.
That's quite an interesting story. Wow. But there's also kind of on the flip side, I guess, the jail cell that Edmund is being kept in, that whole underground area,
Yeah.
which obviously has to be period specific, but
Yes.
certainly a big contrast to the more
Yes.
opulence and the glamorous and all that.
And
What went
that was
into
really
that?
fun to do. That came out of an original, it was a concept Ryan and I had discussed a lot, that we see areas of the hospital that were one thing at the hotel, the original hotel, fictional hotel, and that were transformed into something else. For example, we considered finding an empty swimming pool and creating the operating theater in there. And we didn't end up doing that, but that was one idea. And then the jails, I was like, why don't we say it was the hotel's wine cellar and then make it the jail? And we didn't build it. We did a lot of research on wine cellars, and I kept seeing these Gothic arches made of brick, and we were like, we'll never be able to build that in time. And then Robert again found this amazing location that had not been overshot. Like in LA, it's hard to find locations that haven't appeared in a lot of things, but this one had been shot, of course, but not that much. And it was used to be a Dutch chocolate factory in downtown Los Angeles. And it had all the original tile from, I think, the end of the 19th century. And if you look really closely, some of the tile work depicts chocolate images, like making chocolate, but you can't really see it. And we built all the jail elements in there, and we built a wine rack at the back to suggest that there used to be wine there. And I really love taking a location like that and transforming it into something else. I just think it's fun. So that was really fun.
Yeah. Something else I wanted to ask you about is actually the puppet show that we see in episode 6,
Yeah,
which
I actually had to delegate the puppet show to
really,
my decorator, Matthew Ferguson, because I was on Boys in the Band and I couldn't do double duty at the time. So I can't speak to that, but Matthew could if you wanted to talk to him.
gotcha. Well, I will keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So obviously we can spend a lot of time talking about all the technical aspects of putting things together and finding locations and all that. But just speaking to the show itself, what are your thoughts on just how the environments that these characters are living in are actually kind of informing their behavior and how they carry themselves in the world, things like that?
I think that most of the characters have a abnormally high level of self-esteem or self-confidence, or act as if they do, because I don't think Dr. Hanover, for example, is really that confident, but he acts like he's the grand prince of the manor. And I think that in that environment, it's believable, and it sort of raises the believability level of the character's behavior in that way. I think that if he was, and it's important for the storytelling, I think that these characters have this kind of almost snobby demeanor, especially Ratched. And if she's begging to get work in what a real psychiatric hospital looked like at the time, I don't think people would think she was pathetic, because they were horrible, horrible places. But when she's begging for work in this really glamorous setting, it's believable. So I think that even if the setting itself is not realistic in researching the period sense, it creates a real world for these characters and helps them become more real, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think that's true of a lot of Ryan Murphy
Yes,
productions over the
yes,
years. I'm
yes.
curious, since you've worked with him on a number of projects, what his shows give you that you don't necessarily get anywhere else on other projects that you've done?
The chance to build these really elaborate and I think beautiful sets. I've never had that opportunity before. Of course, I've done builds before, but not to this extent. And Ryan has great taste and is very, very particular about what he wants. And since he's also he's producing all these shows, we're able to give him what he wants. And that's really a luxury for me as a production designer. And it was working with him has been a great experience in that sense. And I've gotten to do, I think I forgot what the question was because I'm just going on and on about Ryan. But it really has allowed me to explore so many different periods and styles, because even when you're like in Versace, which is one of my favorite shows ever that I've worked on, we went from like poverty to, you know, Versace's mansion and everywhere in between, and middle class, and Cunanan with no money, and Cunanan with money, and Cunanan a drug addict, and Cunanan living in this SRO in Miami. So it was the gamut of the social conditions. And I love playing with that and seeing how you can make it all tie together organically, but still you're spreading the story out over all these worlds, and it still has to be unified. And that kind of challenge, I think, is something. It's great with Ryan because he really cares about the look of his shows. And then in long form storytelling in a mini series, you really get to explore the visual worlds of the characters in a way that, as much as I love movies and I'll always be a movie's first designer, you don't get to do that as much in a movie, unless it's maybe like Gates of Heaven or one of those really like famously long movies. But still, then you're only talking about 4 hours. So yeah, I think the scope of the miniseries is a great platform for that.
Yeah. Well, before I let you go, since we're an awards website, I did want to get into a little bit of your awards history. You
Pretty
were
small.
well, still significant. You were nominated at the Oscars. Not everyone could say that.
Yeah, no,
for American Hustle.
Great. I was thrilled. Yeah.
Yeah, and you were nominated at the Emmys for Feud.
Yeah. No, I've been. Those were great experiences. When I got nominated for American Hustle, it's a long story. I probably shouldn't tell on something that's going to be public, but about I'd been up for one of the other movies that was nominated and I didn't get it, and I was upset because I knew that whoever designed that movie would get an Oscar nomination, which everyone wants, let's face it. And I was completely surprised when I got nominated for American Hustle. I really didn't think I had a chance, and I woke up and saw it. I was working on Carol at the time, Todd Haynes movie, and in Cincinnati. And we were about to go scouting, and I got to the scout van and everybody was like, now you're one of us, because they all had Oscar nominations except for me. So it was amazing. It was right before my father passed away, so he got to see it, and that meant a lot to me. And that was a great experience. And same with the Emmys. It was my second TV show and I got nominated for an Emmy. So that was pretty amazing too.
Yeah. Well, for those of you watching, subscribe for more interviews and head to goldderby.com to make your Emmy predictions. Judy, thanks so much for joining me today.
And I want to give a props to Gold Derby, because I think the day before the Oscar nominations for American Hustle, I suddenly was in like the spot to get nominated. And I think I saw that. I was like, what? And then,
wow,
so
that's incredible.
Yeah.
There you go.
The power. There you go. They're accurate.